Well, although there are several that are still out there registering, I think we should get started. I'm Dave Trauger, faculty advisor to the Environmental Action Committee, the student organization on campus who is one of the principal sponsors of this conference. I also serve as vice president to the Story County Citizens for a Better Environment, which is an affiliate chapter of Zero Population Growth, and they also are co-sponsoring this program. I want to welcome all of you to the first statewide conference on environmental action in Iowa. I emphasize the word first because I certainly hope that this is not the last. I hope this is the beginning of a long series of meetings where we can meet together around the state to discuss problems, issues, and programs of mutual concern and interest. The theme of our conference is Iowa, This is the Place. The organizers of this conference believed that this would have broad appeal throughout the state because indeed the word Iowa means this is the place. This is the English translation of the Indian word Iowa. It has also been interpreted as beautiful land. Either way, we can't lose. Iowa, this is the place. And I think it's appropriate that we touch back to to the traditions and the heritage of people who occupied this great land of ours prior to our occupancy. And I think we owe them a great deal to ensure that we don't harm the environment and destroy it, because this is a land that sustained them for many generations. I think they may have left us a good pattern and a good lifestyle that we might contemplate touching back to. This is the second phase of our efforts to achieve a livable environment. In our efforts to maintain environmental quality in the state. The first step was the awareness generated throughout the state, throughout the nation, perhaps even throughout the world by Earth Day of our environmental problems. The second phase is what we're beginning tonight. This is a uniting to coordinate and initiate positive programs towards solutions of our environmental problems. And that is what this conference is all about. The purpose is to get acquainted, to open up lines of communication, to exchange ideas, to assess where we are and where we are going, and to determine how we are going to get there and by what course of action. And the workshop sessions and the panel discussions that we have set before us tomorrow will be just that. We are going to first of all address ourselves to the question of what kind of Iowa do we want, defining the environmental parameters that we seek as we plan an Iowa towards the year 2000, which is merely a short 30 years away. And probably beyond that, we should give some consideration to that as well. And in the workshop sessions tomorrow afternoon, we're going to be working around the general theme, how are we going to save Iowa? How are we going to maintain the environmental quality that we do have in this state? And how are we going to enhance the environment that we have here? I think that one of the reasons why Iowa has been perhaps responded so positively and so impressively to the environmental movement is that in Iowa we indeed do have a chance, an opportunity to protect our water, our air, and our land. The situation has not deteriorated. The environment has not been degraded. Our population growth has not compromised all of our options. And we do have an opportunity, and I think that's why we can be optimistic, and I think that's why we have some opportunities that have been denied people elsewhere. Where we go and what kind of environment that we have really from this point on depends on you, on your commitment, on your originality, on your adaptability, and most of all, on your perseverance, because we are all going to be faced with some very hard choices and decisions in the not too distant future if we're going to preserve and protect the environment that we all care so very much for. In fact, our lives depend upon it. With this framework, I would like to say that I'm looking forward to meeting each and every one of you on a person-to-person basis throughout this conference, and I hope that you will utilize the conference as an opportunity, a platform to get to know one another and to share ideas, both in the formal sessions as well as informally in the halls. I think we've had a good start on that already, and I wish you much success and I hope that you have an opportunity to get some positive ideas to take back to your communities, and so we can all work together on our environmental problems. At this point, I would like to introduce Dr. George Christensen, who is Vice President for Academic Affairs at Iowa State University, and I think he has some words to share with us as far as a welcome to Iowa State University. Dr. Christensen.
Thank you, Dave. This business of welcoming people to conferences has intrigued me, mainly because I've been involved quite a few times. With regard to what constitutes a welcome, and I've worked it out to a bit of a formula. First thing you must say is that the obligation of the person who does the welcoming is to get out of the way of the program as rapidly as possible, and I assure you I will try to do just that. Secondly, and this is a must, the person who gives the welcome must extol the home institution and the home community, talk about all of its virtues. But I think I will exercise a great deal of willpower and restrain myself in this regard, because if I didn't, I would be telling you things for many, many hours about the fact that Iowa State University is the first land-grant institution. I probably would even tell you that it's achieved a great deal of distinction because of its high-quality academic instructional program, because of the international reputation of its research workers, and certainly because of the unparalleled success of its public service. But I'll restrain myself and I'll not talk about these things. Another thing, of course, speaking about environment, is that in this time in the fall, one important part of our environment is this game called football, and it's very typical for welcoming speakers to talk about the prowess of their football teams. And the temptation here will also not be so strong, so I'll restrain myself again. But I will tell you a little bit about the fact that we are very proud of the faculty members and the students here at the university now and those who have been with us for many, many years in the past. Because very literally, being a land-grant type of institution, if we look back at the work that we've been doing and similar institutions have been doing, we know that the students and faculty members have been involved in efforts to improve the environment essentially since the beginning of the institution. Now, you may not believe this because we haven't heard or said too much about it, but I can give you one example. Iowa State was the first land-grant university to admit women students, and our environment has been enhanced ever since. But very seriously, our faculty have been involved for many, many years in work relating to the improvement of the environment. We all know this, and the truth of the matter is that we're like most other institutions. We never gave it much thought because environment itself was not uppermost in our minds. We worked in these areas directly or indirectly without identifying it, without giving it any emphasis. And it's only been within recent years, for many reasons, as we all know, that institutions have been putting emphasis, have been giving publicity to the environment. Now, happily, as far as this institution is concerned, the administration did not have to do the usual thing and appoint a committee to make people interested in a new topic. We did not have to say, now, recognize we have a crisis, an environmental crisis, let's have a committee, let's do something about it. Because very happily, the thing that happened here, I think, was quite unique. Roughly 140 of our faculty members got together by themselves to study, to coordinate our efforts to improve, maintain the environment. At the same time, a large group of students, some of them in the audience here tonight, got together and worked to publicize and to promote ways of improving the environment. And with a combination like this, all the administration essentially had to do was to put a stamp of approval on this activity and to support the activity, and from now on to seek support of the activity from both federal and state sources. So I commend the speakers because I noticed the program is exceedingly well filled with highly qualified speakers. I commend the program committee for the very fine program they've evolved, and certainly the participants for the dedication to this extremely important topic. I wasn't going to say anything about this, but I couldn't help but think that every time you pick up a magazine or a newspaper or even watch the television or listen to the radio these days, there's something said about the improvement of the environment. And this, of course, is good. But in this process, last evening, I picked up last week's Saturday Review, and some of you may have seen the same article. And if you don't mind, I'll take just a few seconds. There was a short article in there by Richard Almer, which I thought was very pertinent to this conference, and I'll just quote a few sections of it. It's called A Small Solution. And Richard Almer writes, I have a solution for the overpopulation problem. And I might say, before I begin, that I looked your program over very thoroughly, and you've covered, or almost covered, every possible topic with regard to environment. I say almost, because this is one area that I don't think you've touched or plan to touch. So unlike the pill, this solution, it has no side effects. Unlike abortion, it does not offend anyone with religious scruples. Unlike war, it requires no bloodshed. It is painless, humane, and eminently sensible. Let people multiply. Let them have as many children as they wish. Let children grow up to enjoy the pleasures of the world. I have only one caution. Don't let them grow up too much. Transistorize them. If, through the use of transistors, we can spectacularly reduce the size of radios, watches, hearing aids, and even complex rocket mechanisms and computers, why can't we do the same with people? Surely this is not beyond the ability of our geneticists, our transplant surgeons, and our electrical engineers. I am not sure how small people should be. Swift's Lilliputians, fully grown, were about 6 inches tall, which seems a reasonable height. When you similarly reduce airplanes, airports, houses, office buildings, golf courses, and eventually cemeteries, roughly on a scale of 1 inch equals 1 foot, you see what happens. We could have 12 times our present population with no more crowding than today. But if things should still seem too tight, we could reduce people to 1 inch or half an inch or even 1/4 of an inch or whatever. Of course, animals and insects would have to be reduced proportionately because no one wants to see 1/4 inch people in a world inhabited by 1 inch spiders and monstrous 4 inch worms. Transistorized people would save us from the disaster toward which ecologists say we are heading. 1 tree would provide the wood for thousands of wee houses and millions upon millions of copies of newsprint for infinitesimal numbers of newspapers. 1 ear of corn would feed many a hungry family. A drop of oil would lubricate no telling how many inch-long automobiles. Best of all, the exhaust from these tiny cars, even using leaded gasoline, would soon dissipate in the great blue yonder. now bluer and yonderer than at any time since the invention of the internal combustion engine. Try as they might, these little people would be unable to pollute our planet's great rivers, lakes, and oceans. Just think of it. A clean world, plenty of room for everybody. Scientists, what are you waiting for? So much for Richard Armour. I thought you'd be interested in this. He provides a solution to the problems you'll be facing during this conference. I admit it's a very small solution to a very complex problem. And very seriously, I really do wonder if mankind wouldn't just somehow manage to pollute the world, regardless of how small he were. So that I think we all have our work cut out for us. And Dave, members of the committee, members of the audience, I am very pleased to welcome you to Ames. And on behalf of the Iowa State University and on behalf of mankind, I wish you a most successful conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Christensen. I would like now to introduce Bill Hulke, who is one of our co-chairmen of the Environmental Action Committee, and he will introduce our first speaker tonight. However, before he does that, I'd like to say that we will be passing out small slips of paper, and during the course of the two presentations, if a question comes to mind that you would like to ask the speakers, please write the question out on the paper and hand it to one of the students who will be collecting these. And they will bring them up front, and we will then ask the questions at the end of their talks. Bill?
Thank you, Dave. First, I would like to say that first time I ever met Doug Scott was at a conference in Pennsylvania, at Buck Hill, Pennsylvania. It was the National Conference on Human Ecology, and myself and a couple other members of Environmental Action, ZPG, attended this conference last April. And it was a 4-day conference, and the first couple days it was kind of shaky and everything. It was something new to the 250 people that were there. We didn't know exactly which way to turn. And I think one of the major things at this conference that was lacking was leadership. Well, the other two people that I was with, we were kind of discouraged, but we decided to hold off for another day. And on the last day, second to the last day of the conference, we attended different workshops, and I happened to attend the workshop that Doug Scott was leading. It was called After the Teach-In, and basically what it was going to talk about was things that we're going to develop after the nationwide teach-in on April 24th. Well, the workshop was 2 hours long, and we talked for almost 3.5 hours. The people in the workshop were just thrilled by the leadership, and questions were being thrown at Doug right and left, and he was able to handle them quite well. And we just felt that coming out of that workshop that we finally really realized that we got something out of this conference after traveling as far as we did. So at this conference in Buck Hill, we came back feeling that we did learn something, and by communicating with other people at it, that it was really worthwhile. Well, I never thought that I'd meet Doug again, but I was fortunate enough to be sent to another conference up in Michigan where Doug also took part in this. And even though I didn't spend as much time at Michigan with him as I did in Pennsylvania, I did talk with him for a while, and I have brought back some of his ideas that we talked about there and in Pennsylvania, and I tried to pass them on to Dave and the other people in our committee to try and strengthen environmental action here. Well, without any more delay, I'd like to introduce Doug Scott of the Wilderness Society. Doug?
Thank you. Who can forget Earth Day? It was wonderful. In a seeming instant, public awareness of the environmental crisis skyrocketed. In every community, hundreds and thousands turned out for speeches, for panels, workshops, ecology fairs, for cleanups along the local river, for bottle drives along the local highways. Nationwide, millions were swept up in a veritable sea of rhetoric and enthusiasm. It was a heady atmosphere, for you could feel that a groundswell was gathering around you. You could feel that people were coming alive to a serious, deadly serious problem, and there was hope in that. Of course, it came to an end. Anyone who walked into the Earth Day activities with the idea that this was the start of a sustained commitment by millions of people walked in to a brick wall. That was never a possibility. He was walking himself, if he had that concept, right into disappointment and disillusionment. Earth Day was wonderful, but it will not come again, and it shouldn't. In that brief Earth Day experience, we came of age in the age of ecology, and we came of age in the age of anxiety. The worried outlook, which a few people had seen before, became the frequent conversation of the masses, of cogent discussion on the boob tube and in the press. Because of Earth Day, it was now a great deal easier to be despondent about the future than it had been heretofore. And that was Earth Day's greatest accomplishment. Its only important accomplishment, really. We all learned just a little bit about the problem that we hadn't known before, and just enough to get good and scared. Just enough to pronounce the word ecology. Many have asked, was Earth Day a fad? The answer is yes. Yes, it was a fad. If you were talking about all the hoopla, all the frenetic, hectic activity, all of the rhetoric. But no is the answer, a resounding no. No, it was not a fad. If you're talking about the possibility it opened up ahead of us to make a real and lasting step of progress in a field of grave, grave danger. What Earth Day accomplished, and what could have been accomplished in no other way, perhaps, was to fill in an incredible vacuum in that spectrum of issues about which concerned citizens have worried in our society. Before Earth Day, if you were a conservationist, there was no question that you were in a minority, a tiny clique of nuts, a small fraternity of bird watchers and pansy planters, usually quiet, easygoing, slightly odd characters, but generally thought to be harmless to society at large. After Earth Day, you aren't in if you aren't for the environment. You aren't committed unless the full extent of your commitment is poured out in your cocktail party rhetoric. After Earth Day, you can't make it as a politician anymore without inserting the words environment and ecology into your old dog-eared and yellowed standard campaign speech. After Earth Day, your nationally circulating magazine or television program is simply Bush League if you haven't run Barry Commoner or Paul Ehrlich or somebody, or a picture of a flower or a tree or a bird on the cover, or devoted countless television hours to the crisis of the environment. I don't mean to sound cynical in saying these things, for I believe that the kind of changes that I have mentioned have been of vital importance. Without these kind of changes, we would have nowhere to go in the environmental movement. We'd still be bird watchers, and we'd still be pansy planters, and we'd still be slightly odd. Earth Day made its impact, and its impact was something which I should note none of us who watched it grow anticipated. No one expected it to become the kind of mass movement sweeping up these millions of people that it did become. And its impact has given us the only opportunity we've got. Earth Day brought us an opportunity to do something about the problems which we could have not, an opportunity we could not have gotten in any other way, certainly not without years of effort just to get where we are today. No, Earth Day was no fad, but by itself it has not brought us through the crisis. Survival is no more certain. No grave problems of the environment have been lessened. Most are vastly worse than they were a year ago. But now it is over, and as I said, it will not come again. It would be unfortunate if it did come again. No, my friends, the blaze of glory is over. The clapping has stopped, the shouting and hurrahs, the hoopla has died down. There were 5,500 people in your auditorium here to hear Paul Ehrlich. There's not 5,500 here tonight, and I find that encouraging. And that may sound a bit paradoxical, but I'll come back to that point. The earth is just as endangered, just as deathly ill as it was before April 22nd, 1970. The quality of our surroundings is just as bad, getting far worse. Now it's the time for the hard work. With hard work, with carefully thought out strategy undertaken with a realistic sense of what the problems are and what the possibilities are and how we can legitimately deal with them, we can take the new opportunity that Earth Day has given us and turn the deadly course of events around to gain a new command over what happens to our environment. Earth Day gave us the grant of public recognition and involvement and motivation that are the essential prerequisites to action. Now comes the action. And ladies and gentlemen, you are the next step. Not those 5,500, but you. It is in you and in you alone that there lies all the hope there is for our environment, all the hope there is that we'll get on to the action phase for our little forlorn planet and for all of our lives. The task ahead is your task. It cannot be accomplished by more rhetoric about the problem. I hope I'm avoiding that kind of rhetoric tonight. It cannot be accomplished by more big rallies and cleanup campaigns and television specials, though all of those things will be important tools. What the environment campaign needs now, the one single, absolutely crucial element which will make us or break us collectively, is you. We've turned the corner. We're ready for action. The path ahead is fraught with difficulty and hardship and reverses, but at least there's a path. All we need now is the direction and the intrepid, devil-may-care leadership to take us there. And that is where you and this conference come in. That is why we are here. At least that's why we're here if we mean business. You know, there's been a lot of silly rhetoric over the past year about the environment problem and the ecology craze, and I've been as guilty as anyone of repeating it. We've all heard the famous dictum from Pogo, "We have met the enemy, and they is us." We've all heard the starry-eyed talk about how the environment movement will bring us all together again. I thought it was the president that was going to do that. Well, it just ain't so. There is nothing magic about the problems of the environment that will overcome human nature, or selfish greed, or limited horizons, or faintness of heart. The racist in his hatred of every race but his own is not suddenly going to join hands with those others and other races in some kind of great crusade for clean air and clean water. The oil executive whose whole ambition and sense of duty is to get more oil, regardless of the side effects, is not going to sit down with us in common devotion to a serious attack on the environment. The Boeing company has not, unless I've been missing some late news, decided to drop the SST and give back all that government subsidy now that we've told them how undecided the impact of the SST might be. The other day I received in my office a letter on this very point from a lady in Georgia who had received an invitation to become a member of the Wilderness Society. In her response, in a little hand letter note, she said, "Dear Wilderness Society, I don't care if the last tree and even the last blade of grass is cut down even with the ground. I don't care if the air gets so polluted you can't see your hand in front of your face. I don't care if the rivers get so polluted that a carp wouldn't live in the cleanest one. Until you Yankee do-gooders give my children and myself freedom to choose the people we wish to associate with, I could care less if the whole country sank into a hole as deep as the ocean. Sincerely." So, we had better recognize that this is not a fun and games thing we're getting into. Some of you have been in on it a long time and know that. No bed of roses, no great rallying civic cause. This is going to be hard work, long fights against seemingly overwhelming odds, bitter defeats, perhaps more of those than victories at the outset, against a host of special interests and greedy types who will fight all the harder because they know that this is the fight to the finish. And so do we. You and I had better recognize right now and not forget that we are signing on for the long haul. The millions who romped on Earth Day fell away from that effort real fast. Others will fall back of faint heart or declining stamina as the going gets tougher. But some will keep on through thick and thin into the very heat of battle. This thing has a kind of a way of sweeping you up if you're not careful. You'll miss meals, you'll lack sleep, you'll hear your phone ringing in the middle of the night, as Dave's has, I'm sure. It is always that way for the troops on the front line, and that's where we are. And the fight is only beginning. Your own university here in Ames has adopted the right tone, I think, in selecting the environment as its theme of the year. Commitment for the 70s, a livable environment. That theme reveals, I think, why it is that we extremists keep at this. If it is all so hard, if the hours are so long and the efforts exhausting, we're either mad to keep it up or just victims of some curious form of self-punishment, or we have a goal and a motivation so overwhelming, so consuming that it has the power over us to strengthen faint hearts, to give new strength to sagging backbones, and to pump adrenaline just when that last bit of energy seems hopelessly impossible.
Bring us out of this kind of conference and sustain our energy and commitments. And there is. It's life. A beautiful thing, you know. What would we do without it?
Individually, we'll all have to find our peace with some sort of answer to that question, of course. But now, for the first time since man became a thinking being, we have to face the question, what would we do without life for our whole species and for the incredible planet haven on which we find ourselves? As they say in Deuteronomy, I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore choose life, that you and your descendants may live. And that's the kind of choice we face. Here, then, lies the goal that keeps us all at it. Life itself, keeping it going at all, making it full and rich and rewarding for so long as we can share it and keep it alive. For that long and for longer, we'd better decide right now that each day must be Earth Day. Survival, that's our cause, or part of it. We have to fight now for the very survival of our species in the future. But it's more than just survival, it must be. We're fighting to regain and restore quality to our lives, individually and collectively. Our movement against pollution and environmental degradation, our fight to save some small and perhaps insignificant marsh, our struggle with those who would rape Alaska for a buck, all of these efforts are not negative and destructive at all. This is not a rearguard battle yet. We're not struggling only to hang on tenuously to the last gasping breath of foul air. No, my friends, we are fighting for life and its quality. We affirm life and the fundamental, inalienable right of all life to its individuality and its perpetuation, its diversity, its living freedom. We oppose all that would belittle life and demean its character or destroy its natural spontaneity and diversity, all that would sully the beauty of life or threaten its continuation. We are locked into a struggle for a future, and one that's not simply bearable, but beautiful, not struggling to live, but living with intensity and fullness in an environment of riching beauty and provenance for all of us. And with that kind of goal, why shouldn't we suffer through troubled times, giving more to this effort than any one of us thinks we have to give each day, yet finding more fulfillment and pride in the achievement of our efforts and trying while we move? Commitment for the 70s and for all the future beyond the 70s, that's what this is all about. Well, what kind of Iowa do we want? Just by asking that question as you set up this program, you have revealed that you recognize that what kind of Iowa we have is up to us. It's our responsibility. Our decision will make Iowa what it becomes, the nation what it becomes, the globe what it becomes. And if we don't decide, we will still be responsible for what emerges. The goal of life and the quality of life has given us our cause and our motivation. The goal of life and the recognition that it will not continue unless we change our ways individually and totally. Earth Day took that issue and that motivation and spread it from the few bird watchers and the few pansy planters to an incredibly broad audience. And that's what gives us our opportunity. The recognition that we could do something useful about it all, the fact that we could come here and talk about what kind of Iowa do we want, that has given us a sense of our enormous responsibility to act. And so we have it, the motivation, the opportunity the Earth Day has given us, the sense of responsibility to take action. So now we come right up against the hardest task of all. Will we act? And if we do, will we get at it soon enough, hard enough, strongly enough, and in the right ways in order to make the difference that must be made? The missing ingredient, the indispensable element at this point in the environmental movement is leadership and direction. And that is where each of us, you and I, come in. Because you are here, you have recognized for yourselves that this is your issue. This is the issue that reaches inside your skin and grabs you hard. You are the leaders. Yours is the hard and long and difficult job of giving direction to this battle now. To a very great segment of our population, Earth Day was enough. Today, they recognized on that day the problems, and they demonstrated their concern by gathering on the grassy hillsides. They stimulated their interest by walking along and picking up a few pieces of litter. To most of those millions who were involved, just recognizing that there was a problem was a big enough step. To them, just realizing that there was trouble was sort of the solution. We seem to have bred into our culture two enormously damaging, wholly wrong assumptions. From the cradle, we are raised with these two ideas until they almost seem like instincts. First of all, we're caught up in the myth that just because we had sensible, far-sighted, distinguished-looking founding fathers, we didn't need much else. Those clever men in Philadelphia, we seem to assume, figured out so wonderful a system for governing our affairs that it's no longer necessary for individuals really to get involved much. Just to have a sizable segment of our people worry about a problem, we seem to think, will sort of automatically mean that something good will happen to cause the problem to go away. Well, clearly it just ain't so. The greatest problem of our environment and just about every other pressing public issue, the greatest problem, is that most of our people assume that once they are concerned, they really don't have to do anything, that the problem, once simply brought to light, will solve itself or be solved for us by those fine public servants who we elect to do our day-to-day worrying and all too often our day-to-day thinking. That is one false assumption that is terribly widespread. The other is kind of the reverse and very closely related and equally as bad. And the second is the assumption that even if you or I recognize a serious problem, there's not much that we can usefully do about it. How can little old me make any dent in the questions of such overwhelming magnitude? Don't you have to have years of training to know what you're talking about? Isn't this the kind of thing that only a specialist, a scientist, a technocrat, a professional would be qualified to worry about or work on? What possible difference will my one small voice or my one single vote or just one letter to my congressman make? And asking those questions, most people don't raise their one small voice. Most people don't write that one small letter. These are excuses, and they're only examples. I could go on at length, stressing the kinds of roadblocks and excuses that stand between us and serious action. But I think the point is clear. Our biggest problem now is the follow-through that will carry us from the rhetorical stage, and the good intentions and the serious goals and the worry about the problems, to the kind of action that will really begin to do something effectively to change things. We have paralyzed ourselves, it seems, perhaps by being even so scary about the difficulties we face. Albert Camus made the point, saying that many men are paralyzed in the face of great tragedy and crisis. And then he went on to say, and I found this quote in your own environmental reading room in your library, Albert Camus said, "But I should like to convince you that the spell can be broken, that there is only an illusion of impotence, that strength of heart, intelligence, and courage are enough to stop fate and sometimes to reverse it. One has merely to will this, not blindly, but with a firm and reasoned will." And I think he's right. I think he's dead right. And I think so few have recognized that basic point. People can make a difference. Individuals can effectively confront these gigantic, seemingly overpowering problems. What one man does can make a difference, perhaps not often in the big things, but very frequently in the little things. And we'll save our environment and ourselves, if at all, not by a big outburst on a single issue, but by 1,000 little battles on 1,000 different fronts from now on, as long as we live, and as long as others pick up that battle after us. I was recently in Chicago at a convention where a number of distinguished people were telling the journalists of this country at one of their conventions how better to report the environmental story. And one of the speakers on that panel was Walter Menninger of the Menninger Clinic in Topeka. And he made a rather interesting statement, I thought. He said, people have a need to regain some sense of mastery of their individual potency. We need to be reminded that there is something an individual can do which will make a difference. Be he a Nader, one man, a Brower, one man, an Ehrlich, one man. A concerned and dedicated individual can serve as a rallying point for others to prompt constructive action and a coping with our overwhelming problems. The press would do well to publicize more widely examples of citizens who have been successful in these endeavors. And I think Mr. Menninger was absolutely correct. Cliff Humphreys from Ecology Action in Berkeley will be here this weekend, and he also, I found this in your ecology browsing library, made the same point that I'm trying to make. He said, inaction is institutionalized in our culture, and so it is. We seem to be raised to avoid taking action. Talk about action, discuss action, have conferences about action. Oh my, yes. So we occupy our time in those things. Conferences with the best of intentions. Talk about the problems. Talk about taking action instead of taking action. I believe this conference is going to be a whole lot different. And I believe you will be setting an example here that can be of huge importance across the country. Those of us who have occasion to watch what's happening with this movement in various parts of the country have occasion to be disappointed an awful lot of the time by what's going on. And what you're doing here and the kind of program that you set up is one of the more encouraging things that I have seen lately. It's got great promise. It's something that's not being done virtually anywhere else. And if you can bring it off, you'll have done the whole movement a tremendous service. Because everywhere in the afterglow of Earth Day, serious people are seriously asking, what can I do? They haven't yet found many answers, and certainly they haven't found the most important ones. Your conference will be different because you come here focused on action, because you recognize that you yourselves are the leaders in this state who are going to be making the difference if any difference is made. So I'm back where I was a moment ago. The topic is leadership. This is the crucial, essential, needed thing. The fact is clear. Changes have to be made. The kind of Iowa and the kind of nation and the kind of globe which we all want, we know what that's like. We don't have, and we certainly are not moving in the right direction. Changes are needed, but changes take more than motivation. They take more than the kind of opportunity that Earth Day has opened to us. They take more than a sense of responsibility. The essential ingredient is leadership, and that's your role. So you're asking the right question in the second part of your program. How do we get the kind of Iowa that we decide we want? There is no one answer. There are many. Some will find themselves best suited to working through individual action, encouraging housewives to choose low-phosphate detergents, for example. Some will want to work in public education through environmental education in the schools. Some will find their most effective efforts through churches and other groups working for changes in basic attitudes, seeking a new ethic of man's relation to his surroundings, his relation to his fellow men. Some will try to challenge our economic system, seeking to turn it from the sometimes heedless emphasis on making a buck and at the expense of anything else, and making the changes that will allow us to have a livelihood without simultaneously destroying our lives and our earth. Finally, some will seek to work in the political arena, seeking the kind of public decisions in courts, in legislatures, in mayor's offices, governor's offices, in the president's office, and in the Congress, which will establish new governing policies compatible with the environment and future of life on Earth and the quality of that life. But whatever means you choose, several things must be remembered. First, there is no one right way to go about this. This is an enormously pervasive kind of problem. It can be met only by a great diversity and pervasive series of efforts on a wide front. Each of us must work in the area where we find the greatest effectiveness personally and compatibly with the other things in our lives. It is tremendously damaging for us to bicker back and forth about whether we should focus exclusively on educating consumers or exclusively on political action. And it's that kind of bickering back and forth that keeps us from taking any action at all. Second, no one individual can do the job. The kind of leadership which is needed in these kinds of efforts must be that kind of leadership which reaches out to involve more and more people as leaders. The conservation movement in this country went through a 20-year period in which it was dominated by 5 or 6 charismatic leaders. That was an important phase of the conservation effort. But that kind of phase won't work anymore. 5 or 6 people aren't going to save anything. 5 or 6 people are not going to make the difference in the future of Iowa. Unless those 5 or 6 people gather around them 5 or 6 more people, and unless it just keeps going and building. And nowhere is this clearer than on a college campus, because every 4 years you've got a new cast of characters. And here's a good place to develop the techniques, as you're developing them in your group here, for gaining continuity against all the odds of people who drop out and people who move away, of keeping the leadership broadening and deepening. This is incredibly important. And finally, I think we must be constantly alert to avoid the traps which would allure us into ineffectiveness and blind alleys. It's no surprise that the oil companies are making a big pitch now to environmental concern. What can one man do, my friend? Just buy Amoco, the unleaded gas. Well, you buy our wonderful lead-free gasoline, and that is a good step. But what are they putting in there in place of the lead? And what does any of that have to do with the crowded streets, too many automobiles, with mushrooming consumption of gasoline itself? Buying loads and loads of non-leaded or low-leaded gasoline is not going to make one whip of a difference in the future of the North Slope of Alaska. We have been tempted, I fear, to be deflected from the real issues and to take action on side issues and non-issues. We find it all too easy to be misled, and the result is that we misdefine the problems and so get the wrong start from the outset, or we misdefine the solutions and never get anywhere once we try. The problem with non-returnable soda cans and beer bottles, non-biodegradable, is not that people throw them along highways so much as it is that we have them in the first place, when we could have returnable bottles and make a big dent in the whole problem. No wonder that the container industry is the biggest financial supporter of the anti-litter groups. They promote the wrong definition of the problem. The solution to the problem of phosphates in detergents is not to convince every American housewife to buy low-phosphate detergent, although that's a good tool for getting that housewife involved. But rather, the real solution is not putting the phosphates in the detergents in the first place. And if that means that we go back to soap and have to wear duller clothing, well, that's an awfully high price to pay for having clean waters and clear lakes. We have to work seriously and with sophistication to define the issues that we're confronting, from the littlest issue of saving the local marsh or stopping the expansion of a runway into a natural area or whatever it is, on to the largest issues. In the conservation organizations in this country, the vast proportion of the time is spent trying to define the issues in the most effective way. When you look at the problem of Alaska, that's not one issue, that's thousands of issues. How do you get a handle on it in the way that will work the best to reach a solution? The other thing that we need, and that is leaders, it's your obligation to work towards unstintingly, is the training and development of people. There isn't any easy answer to being an effective citizen on environmental matters, for example, through the political route. There isn't any easy toolkit for how you work on an economic boycott, if that's what you're interested in. There are hard, difficult, sophisticated techniques to be learned. Writing a letter to your congressman is something that you can do as you'd write a letter to your great aunt, or it's something you can do in a way to be effective. And there are proven, useful, wise, well-known ways to do that. But they have to be learned, and they have to be practiced, and they have to be taught. I hope that the Environment Action Group and the confederation that I sincerely hope you will form in this state will turn its attention in the future from conferences, one is enough, to workshops, small gatherings of dedicated people to learn and spread techniques, small gatherings of dedicated people going to your state legislature and making those legislators sit up and take notice. A year ago, you couldn't muster 23 votes against the supersonic transport in this country, in the United States Senate. Next week, we'll be mustering perhaps a majority against that thing, just perhaps. And it's because some people decided that it was time to stop talking about it and to use hard, difficult, sophisticated techniques and to do it in a serious and organized way. I hope that your confederation will move as its first activity towards the development and wide dissemination of a leader's newsletter that will keep everyone informed when there's action to be taken. This is the greatest place where we fall down. All of us would like to do the right thing by Alaska or the right thing by Podunk Marsh or the right thing by the state of Iowa. But too frequently, the first we know that there's an issue is when it appears in the newspaper saying that it's just been lost. You have to plug in earlier. And though there are techniques, there are ways, there are sources of information that need to be developed for that. And leadership, the kind of leadership that you represent and that isn't represented anyplace else on this issue in the state of Iowa, is the essential catalyst. So look around you, get acquainted, because you're all there is, you and the few who will join us tomorrow. You're going to have to work together or no one's going to work effectively. If we're going to answer the questions of what kind of Iowa do we want and how do we get it? There are hard things, difficult things to be learned and taught in those workshops tomorrow, and those are the things we should get down to as the first order of business, not the last order of business, in the final waning hours of our time together. I guess I'll close by citing something that I read on the airplane on the way in from the back of a copy of the Iowa division of the Isaac Walton League of America's February 1970 newsletter. A little quote, it didn't even say what the source was, but the thoughts got the truth in it. What we have done for ourselves dies with us. What we have done for others in the world remains and is immortal. Tomorrow's America, tomorrow's Iowa, will be what we make it today. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Doug. The next speaker will be introduced by Karen Van Zanti, who is the other co-chairman of our Environmental Action Committee. Karen is a senior in outdoor recreation, and I guess I forgot to say that Bill is a senior in botany, and I'll let Karen introduce our next speaker then.